They made one mistake, one that would cost them everything. When the ruthless Black Vultures gang killed a stray dog for fun, they thought it was just another night of senseless violence. What they didn't know was that the dog belonged to Darius Kane, the deadliest assassin to ever walk the earth. They burned his home. They took the only thing he cared about. Now the streets will run red with their blood. As the gang scrambles to survive, Darius hunts them down with terrifying precision, cutting through their ranks like a ghost in the night. But when the Russian Bratva enters the fray, thinking they can stop him, they quickly realize there is no stopping a man with nothing left to lose. This isn't just revenge. This is a reckoning. And by the time it's over, the world will remember the name Darius Kane. The rain drizzled lightly over the dimly lit streets of Oak Ridge, a city crawling with crime, corruption, and men who believed they were untouchable. Among them was the Black Vultures, a ruthless gang that thrived on fear. No one dared challenge them. No one except a man they had never heard of. Darius Kane had lived a quiet life for the past 5 years. He had no social ties, no past anyone could dig up, and no reason to be noticed. The only thing that kept him grounded was his dog, Shadow, a black Belgian Malinois, disciplined, sharp, and fiercely loyal. That night, Darius had taken Shadow for their usual late-night walk. The streets were eerily empty, save for a few broken streetlights flickering in the darkness. They passed through an alleyway near an abandoned warehouse, where the Black Vultures often gathered. Darius wasn't concerned. He had walked this path hundreds of times. But then, voices, laughter, the sound of a bottle smashing. Darius barely glanced their way, but Shadow growled lowly beside him. That was when one of the gang members, a young, cocky recruit named Rico, whistled. "Look at this! The old man's got a guard dog." Darius kept walking. He had seen enough in his lifetime to know when to ignore provocation. "Hey, I'm talking to you!" Rico barked, stepping forward. Darius stopped, his muscles tensing. Shadow stood beside him, alert. The other gang members, 5 in total, leaned against their motorcycles, watching. Rico grinned, pulling a knife from his pocket. "What's your problem?" Darius asked, his voice calm but edged with warning. Rico tilted his head. "Problem? Nah, I just don't like being ignored." Before Darius could respond, Rico lunged. Shadow reacted instantly, leaping between them and sinking his teeth into Rico's wrist. The young gangster screamed in pain, dropping his knife. That was when everything changed. The others rushed forward, shouting and kicking. Shadow fought fiercely, his instincts razor sharp, but he was outnumbered. One of the gang members, a tall, bald man with a snake tattoo on his neck, pulled out a gun. Darius's eyes widened. "No!" The gunshot echoed through the alley. Shadow yelped and collapsed. Darius froze. The world slowed. The sound of laughter rang in his ears, blending with the ringing from the shot. His hands clenched into fists, his breath controlled but filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Rage. Rico clutched his wounded wrist, his face contorted with pain and fury. "Stupid mutt," he spat, delivering one last kick to Shadow's lifeless body. The gang turned to leave, thinking it was over. But it wasn't. Darius knelt beside Shadow, his fingers brushing through the thick black fur now stained with blood. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The man he had hidden for so long, the man he had buried, was waking up. They had no idea what they had just done. As the gang disappeared into the night, laughing and bragging about their petty crime, Darius stood up. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with control. He had spent years learning to suppress the darkness inside him, but now there was no reason to hold it back. His past was about to catch up with them. The deadliest assassin the world had ever known was about to hunt. The city of Oak Ridge had long been a playground for criminals, but tonight, the Black Vultures had unknowingly awakened something far worse than themselves. Darius Kane stood in the dimly lit alley, his fists clenched at his sides. The scent of blood and gunpowder still lingered in the air. Shadow, the only thing tethering him to a life of peace, lay lifeless at his feet. For years, Darius had been a ghost, erased from every government record, buried beneath layers of classified operations. He was a phantom, a name whispered only in the darkest circles. The world had long believed him dead, But now death itself had returned. Darius knelt beside Shadow, gently running his hand over the dog's fur. His movements were precise, methodical. He wasn't just grieving, he was calculating. This wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a declaration. And declarations required responses. He reached inside his coat and pulled out an old, untraceable phone. A number he hadn't dialed in years burned in his memory. He pressed the digits, and after a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" Darius's voice was cold. "I need a location on the Black Vultures." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Well, well, I never thought I'd hear from you again, Ghost. Save the nostalgia. Can you get me what I need?" "Of course, but you know the rules. Information like this doesn't come free." Darius's jaw tightened. "You still need the debt settled from Dubai?" Another chuckle. "You handle this, and we're even. Send me the location." A text came through a second later. Darius didn't waste time. He pocketed the phone, stood, and took one last look at Shadow. "I'll make this right," he murmured. Then with a quiet efficiency, he turned and disappeared into the night. The Black Vultures weren't hard to find. They operated out of an old warehouse on the south side of the city, using it as a base for their drug operations. The gang wasn't small, but that didn't matter. Darius wasn't here for war. He was here for execution. He arrived just past midnight. The warehouse was dimly lit, a few gang members loitering outside, smoking and laughing. He counted 6 visible men. There would be more inside. Darius moved swiftly, his steps silent. He slipped behind one of the guards and, with a precise movement, wrapped an arm around the man's neck. A quick twist. No struggle, no sound. The body slumped to the ground. The second man barely had time to react before Darius grabbed him, slamming his head into the wall. He crumpled instantly. 2 down, 4 left outside. Darius pulled a switchblade from his boot and moved like a shadow. The next man turned just in time to see the glint of the blade before it sliced cleanly across his throat. The last 2 guards finally noticed something was wrong. "Yo, what the?" Darius lunged. The first thug reached for his gun, but Darius was faster. He kicked the weapon out of the man's hands, spun, and delivered a brutal elbow strike to his jaw. Teeth shattered as the thug collapsed. The final man fumbled with his pistol, his hands shaking. "Who the hell are you?" Darius didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it until the gun clattered to the ground. Then, without hesitation, he drove his knee into the man's stomach, knocking the air from his lungs. A second later, the thug lay motionless. Darius exhaled. The outside was clear. Now the real work began. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the stench of cheap alcohol. A dozen gang members sat around playing cards and laughing. Rico, the man who had started it all, nursed his bandaged wrist. His pride still wounded, he slammed his fist on the table. "Man, I swear I'm going to find that guy and put a bullet in his head." Snake, the bald gang lieutenant, leaned back in his chair. "Relax. He ain't stupid enough to come after us." The moment the words left his mouth, the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the warehouse. A hush fell over the gang. Then, thud. A body dropped in the darkness. Then another. Panic spread like wildfire. "What the hell is going on?" someone shouted. A single emergency light flickered on, casting eerie shadows. Rico's breath hitched when he saw them. 2 bodies sprawled on the ground, their throats slit. Then from the shadows, a voice, cold, merciless. "You shouldn't have killed my dog." A blur of movement. Darius struck like lightning. He grabbed one thug, disarmed him in a flash, and fired the man's own gun into his skull. Snake pulled his pistol, but Darius was faster. He flipped a table, using it as cover, then threw a knife. It struck Snake's shoulder, making him howl in pain. The gang scrambled, knocking over chairs, reaching for weapons, but it was useless. Darius was among them now, moving like a ghost. A bone-crunching kick sent one man crashing into a shelf. Another received a brutal punch to the throat, dropping instantly. Rico scrambled backward, eyes wide with terror. You don't know who we are, man. You're dead." Darius grabbed Rico by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "I know exactly who you are," he said calmly. "The problem is, You don't know who I am. Rico trembled. Please. Darius's eyes were empty. This is just the beginning. With that, he released Rico, letting him fall to the floor, gasping. He turned and walked out of the warehouse, leaving chaos in his wake. The Black Vultures had no idea what they had just unleashed. Darius Kane moved like a phantom through the night, his mind sharp and focused. The warehouse was behind him, but his mission had only begun. He had sent a message, but messages weren't enough. The Black Vultures needed to understand. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. As he slipped through the alleyways, he replayed every detail in his mind. The gang had been caught off guard, but that wouldn't last. By now, Rico and Snake would be rallying the rest of their crew, turning their headquarters into a fortress. That was fine. A fortress was only as strong as the men inside it, and Darius had spent his life breaking men like them. Across the city, at an underground club known as the Den, Rico sat slumped in a chair, his face pale and slick with sweat. His hands trembled as he poured himself another drink. The ice rattled in the glass. Snake paced the room, his shoulder hastily bandaged, rage burning in his eyes. "I told you," he growled. "I told you not to mess with random people on the street. Now we got some ghosts creeping through the shadows, taking out our guys like it's nothing." Rico downed his drink in one swallow. How the hell was I supposed to know? He looked like just another quiet old man. Snake slammed his fist on the table. "You think a quiet old man moves like that? He took out half our guys in minutes. This ain't normal." One of the gang's senior members, Carlos, leaned forward, his expression grim. "This ain't just some ex-military dude looking for payback. This guy knew exactly what he was doing. He cut the power, took us out one by one, and left without a scratch. You don't pull that off unless you've done it before." Silence fell over the room. Rico swallowed hard. "So, what do we do?" Snake pulled out his phone and made a call. "We don't play defense. We find him first." Darius had anticipated this. He had spent years studying men like them, and they were always predictable. Panic would set in first, then anger, then desperation. They would come looking for him, which was exactly what he wanted. Darius arrived at an old safe house on the outskirts of the city. It had been years since he last set foot in this place, but the moment he entered, his instincts took over. Everything was exactly where he had left it. He walked past an empty weapons rack to a locked chest in the corner. With a quiet click, he opened it. Inside were the tools of a man he had once been. A silenced pistol, a combat knife, a tactical vest, smoke grenades, a few untraceable phones. He ran his fingers over the weapons, feeling their weight. He had told himself he was done with this life, but life had a way of dragging men back into the darkness. And tonight, he would embrace it. The Black Vultures wasted no time. Within hours, they had a small army combing the streets, looking for any sign of Darius. They leaned on informants, bribed corrupt cops, and threatened anyone who might have seen him. Most people were too scared to talk, but one man, a street hustler named Leon, claimed he had seen Darius near the industrial district. He had no idea what he was selling. Yeah, I saw him," Leon said, rubbing his hands together. "Dude was moving real smooth, heading toward one of those old factories. Looked like he knew where he was going." Snake grinned. "Good." He turned to his men. "Lock the district down. Block off every exit. We hunt this bastard tonight." Darius was waiting. He had positioned himself on the rooftop of an abandoned factory, watching as the gang's vehicles flooded the area. They moved in groups, sweeping the buildings one by one, armed to the teeth. Good. They had brought numbers, but numbers wouldn't help them here. Darius took a slow, controlled breath. Then he moved. The first two gang members never saw it coming. As they entered one of the old warehouses, Darius dropped silently behind them. A quick strike to the throat dropped the first man instantly. The second turned just in time to see a flash of silver before Darius's knife sliced across his leg. He let out a choked scream, collapsing. Darius grabbed him, pressing a blade to his throat. "How many of you are here?" the thug gasped. 20, maybe more. Snake brought everyone." Darius didn't hesitate. A sharp twist and the man went limp. 19 left. Meanwhile, Snake and Rico were outside barking orders. "Spread out," Snake growled. "The bastard's here somewhere." Rico, still shaken, stuck close to Carlos. "Man, I don't like this. It's too quiet." Carlos exhaled. "Yeah, because we're the ones being hunted." As if on cue, a body crashed from a second-story window, landing with a sickening thud in front of them. Rico staggered back. "Oh, hell no!" Gunfire erupted as panic took over. The gang members fired blindly, wasting ammo on shadows. Darius, perched above, watched them. They were already breaking. He dropped a smoke grenade. The alley filled with thick, blinding fog. Then he moved. He slipped through the chaos, striking with precision. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't his. One of the gang members fired wildly, hitting his own man in the confusion. Darius reached the edge of the smoke and grabbed another thug, slamming his head into a steel beam. 17. A desperate voice screamed, "He's picking us off!" They weren't wrong. Snake gritted his teeth, realizing they were losing. "Fall back! Regroup at the safe house!" The gang scrambled, dragging their wounded with them. Darius watched them flee. He could have chased them, but that wasn't the plan. He needed them to run, because fear was a weapon, and now they would spend every second wondering when he would come for them again. At the gang's safe house, Snake slammed his fist on the table. "This ain't just some crazy ex-cop or military guy. This is something else." Rico, shaking, wiped sweat from his face. We gotta call in more guys. Get some serious firepower." Carlos nodded. "We need outside help. Someone who can take this guy out before he wipes us off the map." Snake exhaled. "I know just the guy." He pulled out his phone. Far away in the shadows of another city, a phone rang. A deep voice answered. "Talk." Snake smirked. "We got a problem. A ghost that needs burying. You in?" A pause, then, "I'm listening." Darius had declared war, and now war was coming for him. The city never truly slept, but tonight the streets of Oak Ridge were quieter than usual. Word had spread like wildfire. Someone had declared war on the Black Vultures, and the gang was bleeding. Darius Kane stood atop a derelict building, watching the gang's safe house from a distance. He had made his move, and they had retreated. Now they were scrambling, looking for a way to fight back. He needed to know what their next step would be. And that's when he saw him. A new figure had entered the battlefield. Inside the safe house, Snake, Rico, and Carlos sat tensely as a man paced before them. He wasn't a regular enforcer. He was something much worse. Leonid the Reaper Volkov was an imported nightmare, a Russian contract killer with a brutal reputation. Unlike street thugs, Volkov was methodical, a predator who hunted men for sport. He had no allegiance, no emotion, only a mission. Snake leaned forward. "You understand the job?" Volkov smirked, running a hand over his shaved head. "You pay, I kill." His accent was thick, his tone cold. Carlos swallowed. "I don't think you understand, man. This guy, he ain't normal. He moves like a ghost, takes out men like he's done it 100 times before." Volkov's grin widened. "Good. I like challenge." Rico shifted nervously. "We need him gone. Fast." Volkov nodded. "I will need information. His habits, his movements, where he might strike next." Snake exhaled. "We don't know, but if he's watching us, we make him come to us." Darius remained in the shadows, eyes locked on the new player. This was different. The Black Vultures were just thugs, predictable in their desperation. But this man, the way he moved, the way he carried himself. Darius knew the type, a professional. That changed everything. Darius had spent years eliminating men like Volkov, but he had always been the hunter. Now someone had been sent to hunt him. He needed to prepare. The trap was set. The Black Vultures spread word across the city, letting it slip that they were moving a high-value shipment through the docks. It was bait, designed to draw Darius out. Volkov watched from a nearby rooftop, waiting. His sniper rifle was ready, the scope scanning every shadow. If the ghost showed himself, Volkov would put him down before he got close. Time passed. Midnight arrived. Then, movement. A single figure emerged from the darkness, approaching the warehouse where the shipment was allegedly being held. Volkov smirked. Idiot. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, a blinding explosion erupted from the rooftop across from him. Volkov flinched as the blast sent debris flying. His scope cracked. By the time he regained his focus, the figure below was gone. Volkov's smirk faded. He had been played. Darius moved quickly. The explosion had been carefully placed, a distraction, a warning. He had studied the sniper's position beforehand. Professionals like Volkov always chose the highest vantage point with the best escape route. Darius wasn't going to let him take it. As Volkov descended the fire escape, his instincts screamed at him. He turned, drawing his pistol. Too late. Darius struck like lightning, slamming Volkov's wrist into the railing, forcing the gun from his grip. Volkov pivoted, swinging a knife, but Darius ducked, grabbing his arm and twisting. The knife clattered to the ground. Volkov grunted. You're good. Darius's voice was cold. You're not. Volkov drove his knee forward, breaking Darius's hold, then spun, delivering a vicious backhand strike. Darius barely dodged in time, countering with a sharp elbow to Volkov's ribs. They separated, each gauging the other. Volkov grinned, wiping blood from his lip. This fun. Darius didn't respond. He attacked. Blows were exchanged in rapid succession. Fists, elbows, knees. Each strike was calculated, lethal. Volkov was skilled, his movements refined. But Darius had spent years fighting men like him. Volkov made a mistake. He overcommitted on a punch. Darius sidestepped, seized Volkov's arm, and drove him into the railing with bone-cracking force. For the first time, Volkov's grin faltered. Darius pressed a knife to his throat. Who sent you? Volkov chuckled, even with a blade against his skin. We both know answer. Darius narrowed his eyes. Volkov leaned closer. You kill me, another comes. Always another. Darius exhaled sharply. He knew Volkov was right. The Black Vultures wouldn't stop, but he could send a message. With a swift motion, he flipped the knife, striking Volkov's temple with the hilt. The assassin crumpled, unconscious. Darius knelt, pulled out Volkov's phone, and typed a single message to Snake. Your man failed. I'm coming for you next. Then he vanished into the night. Back at the safe house, Snake read the message, his face pale. Rico stammered. So, Volkov's dead? Carlos shook his head. Number, but he lost. Snake clenched his jaw. Enough of this cat and mouse game. We stopped waiting for him to pick us off. Carlos hesitated. You saying we run? Snake's eyes burned with fury. Number, we burn this city to the ground if we have to. We make it clear, either he dies or we do. Rico gulped. So what now? Snake exhaled. We bring in everyone. No more games. No more hiding. Darius stood in the shadows watching as the gang moved. The safe house was no longer a hideout. It was a war zone. The Black Vultures had fortified their position, gathered every man they could. They were done playing defense. Darius tightened his grip on his weapon. That was fine, because neither was he. The city was shifting. Fear had settled in like a thick fog, wrapping itself around every corner. The Black Vultures were no longer just a gang. They had become an army, flooding the streets with weapons and bodies. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing for war. Darius Kane watched from the rooftop of an abandoned high-rise, scanning the chaos below. Every thug in the city had been mobilized. Barricades were set up. Gunmen patrolled intersections. The gang had turned the streets into a battlefield. But Darius wasn't intimidated. He had seen worse, and he had survived worse. Inside the Black Vultures' headquarters, Snake stood in front of a massive table. A city map spread across it. Dozens of gang members surrounded him, armed to the teeth. This ain't a gang fight anymore, Snake growled. This is survival. We either put this guy down, or he takes us all out. Carlos, rubbing his temples, exhaled. We need a plan. The city ain't big enough to run, and he's got the advantage if we sit here waiting. Rico leaned forward. So we flush him out. We start squeezing the city, make him come to us. Snake nodded. Exactly. We hit every place he might be hiding. We burn it all down if we have to. Carlos hesitated. You sure about this? What if this makes him angrier? Snake's eyes burned with frustration. He's already angry. He's killing our men like it's sport. We need to end this now. Darius anticipated this. They were scared, which meant they were desperate. Desperate men made mistakes, and he was going to exploit every single one. Darius moved through the dark, his presence a whisper in the wind. He had ditched his usual approach. No more careful surgical strikes. This was war now. He started with the safe houses. The first target was a rundown apartment complex on the east side, where the vultures stored weapons and drugs. Darius didn't waste time. He entered through the back, silent as death. 5 men inside, all armed. By the time the first realized something was wrong, the second was already dead. Darius moved fast, eliminating them one by one, slipping through the rooms like a shadow. By the time the last man fired his weapon, Darius was already behind him, a blade pressed to his throat. "Tell your boss," Darius whispered. "I'm not coming for him." The thug swallowed hard. "Well, what?" "I'm already here." Darius knocked him unconscious and disappeared into the night. Snake nearly broke his phone when he got the call. "Another one?" he roared. Carlos clenched his fists. "He's not hiding anymore. He's moving faster." Snake breathed heavily, pacing. "Then we do it now, all at once. No more waiting." Rico's voice shook. "You mean—" Snake turned to him, eyes cold. "We burn his past." Darius had just finished taking out another outpost when he got the message. It was an address. His address. His blood ran cold. They had found his home. He sprinted across the city, his body moving on instinct. By the time he arrived, the flames were already roaring. His house, his sanctuary, was burning. A lifetime of memories, the only pieces of his past he had allowed himself to keep, were turning to ash before his eyes. And at the center of it all, standing in front of the blaze, was Snake. The gang leader grinned, holding up a small object. A dog collar. The last thing Darius had left of Shadow. Darius felt something deep inside him break. Snake's voice carried through the flames. "You wanted war! You got it!" Darius didn't speak, didn't move. For the first time in years, pure, unfiltered rage took over. The Black Vultures had no idea what was coming for them. The fire crackled, painting the night sky in shades of orange and red. The air was thick with smoke, the heat licking at Darius Kane's skin. But he didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything. The only sound that mattered was the quiet jingle of the dog collar in Snake's hand. Darius had thought he had control over himself, even through the bloodshed. He had believed that he could handle this methodically. But this was personal. Snake grinned, stepping forward. "What's wrong, assassin? Thought you could wipe us out and walk away clean?" He chuckled, tossing the collar up and catching it lazily. "Guess what? You ain't untouchable." Darius's muscles tensed, his breath slow and measured. The anger inside him was cold now, sharpened into something lethal. "You have no idea what you've just done." Snake's smirk faltered for a split second before he covered it up with bravado. "Yeah? And what are you gonna do, huh? Kill me?" He spread his arms wide. "Go ahead. But it won't bring your little mutt back." Darius moved. Fast. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he was in front of Snake, his fist slamming into the gang leader's jaw like a sledgehammer. Snake's body lifted off the ground and crashed into the hood of a nearby car. The gang members around them barely had time to react before Darius was already moving again. The first gunman raised his weapon. Darius twisted his body, grabbing the thug's wrist and snapping it sideways. The gun discharged wildly into the night as Darius yanked it free and used it to fire 2 clean shots into the legs of the next man. Screams filled the air. Chaos erupted. The Black Vultures scrambled, but it was too late. Darius was already inside the storm. Carlos and Rico watched the carnage from the safety of a black SUV parked a block away. Carlos gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white. "Jesus Christ." Rico swallowed hard. "We shouldn't be here, man. This ain't a fight. This is a massacre." Carlos hesitated, then reached for his phone. "We call Volkov." Rico stared at him like he was insane. "Are you stupid? Volkov's gone." "He made sure of that." Carlos shook his head. "Not him. His people." Rico blinked. "The Bratva?" Carlos nodded. We need something bigger than bullets, man. We need a damn army. Darius was relentless. The gang had numbers, but he had precision. He was a ghost in the smoke, using the flames and shadows to his advantage. Every movement was calculated, every strike, every shot, every step. A knife slashed toward him. He caught the attacker's wrist mid-swing, twisting it so violently that bones snapped. He used the man's own momentum to hurl him into another thug, both bodies crashing into the pavement. Gunfire roared, but Darius never stayed in one place long enough to be hit. He moved through the chaos, turning their weapons against them, dismantling them one by one. Snake stumbled to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth. He grabbed a shotgun from one of the fallen men and pumped it with shaking hands. "You," he coughed, wiping his lip. "You think you're some kind of nightmare?" He aimed the barrel at Darius's head. Darius exhaled. "No." Then he moved. Before Snake could pull the trigger, Darius kicked the shotgun upward. The blast roared into the night sky. In the same motion, Darius stepped inside Snake's guard, his elbow smashing into Snake's nose. Snake staggered back, dazed. Darius grabbed him by the throat and slammed him onto the concrete. The gang leader choked, gasping for breath. He reached for his pistol. Darius crushed his wrist beneath his boot. Snake screamed. Darius crouched beside him, his voice calm. "You burned my home." His fingers wrapped around Snake's collarbone, applying pressure. "You burned my dog's memory." Snake wheezed. "It was just a dog." Darius's grip tightened. "Say that again." Snake's breath hitched. Before Darius could finish him, an engine roared in the distance. A convoy of black SUVs tore through the streets, headlights flashing like the eyes of something monstrous. Darius recognized the insignia on the vehicles immediately. The Bratva, Russian mob, Volkov's people. The doors swung open before the vehicles even stopped. Heavily armed men spilled out, their weapons trained directly on Darius. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a pristine suit, stepped forward. His sharp features and ice-blue eyes made his presence even more unnerving. Darius had seen his face in classified dossiers before. Mikhail Petrov, one of the Bratva's deadliest enforcers. Mikhail adjusted the cuffs of his suit, then looked down at Snake, who was still gasping on the ground. "Pathetic." Snake coughed. "Took you long enough." Mikhail ignored him, his gaze locking onto Darius. "You killed one of ours." Darius straightened. "He came after me." Mikhail smirked. "And you expect me to care?" He motioned to his men. "Take him." Darius's muscles tensed. He could escape. He knew that. But fighting this many armed men at once? Even he wasn't invincible. Mikhail must have sensed his hesitation. He chuckled, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. "You're impressive, Mr. Kane, but even the deadliest wolf can't fight an entire pack." Darius clenched his jaw. His mind raced. Options? One of the Bratva soldiers stepped forward, his rifle aimed at Darius's chest. "On your knees." Darius didn't move. The soldier clicked the safety off. Then, a boom echoed through the night. The soldier's head snapped back, blood spraying as he crumpled to the ground. Mikhail's eyes widened. "What the—" Another gunshot rang out, then another. Suddenly, the Bratva were the ones caught off guard. Their men dropped one by one, sniper fire picking them off with terrifying precision. Darius took his chance. He lunged. He ripped the rifle from a Bratva thug, swinging it like a club into another's jaw. The street erupted into chaos once again. Snake scrambled away in the confusion, disappearing into the smoke. Mikhail ducked behind a car, barking orders in Russian. "Find the shooter!" But it was too late. The sniper had already vanished. Darius moved through the chaos, cutting through enemies like a phantom. He didn't know who had just saved him, but he would soon find out. Darius Kane stood in the middle of a battlefield. The streets were littered with bodies, Black Vultures and Bratva alike. Blood pooled in the cracks of the pavement. Smoke curled into the air from burning cars. He had torn through them all. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Snake had disappeared in the chaos. But Darius knew exactly where he was running, and he was going to finish this. Snake's last stand. Inside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Snake limped through the darkness. His breathing was ragged, his body aching from the beating Darius had given him. He clutched his broken wrist, wincing as he stumbled forward. Think, Snake. Think. The Bratva was wiped out. His gang was in shambles. And now the devil himself was coming for him. He grabbed a duffel bag filled with cash and weapons, stuffing a pistol into his waistband. His escape plan was simple: get the hell out of the city and disappear. But deep down he knew. He wasn't leaving this place alive. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating. Then, footsteps. Snake froze. His fingers tightened around his pistol grip. The footsteps were slow, measured, getting closer. Snake swallowed hard. I know you're there, Kane. Silence. His pulse pounded in his ears. Come on, man. Let's talk about this. You don't have to do this. Still no answer. Then, the overhead lights flickered, and Darius Kane stepped out of the shadows. Snake's breath caught in his throat. Darius looked like a ghost, his suit torn, his knuckles bruised, his eyes cold and hollow. He didn't speak. He just kept walking. Snake's fingers twitched toward his gun. I'll shoot, man. I swear to God, I'll do it. Darius didn't stop. Snake's hands shot up. He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Darius didn't hesitate. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance, snatching the pistol from Snake's grip and slamming it into his ribs. Snake let out a strangled gasp, dropping to his knees. Darius stood over him. You burned my home, Darius said, his voice deadly calm. Snake coughed, spitting blood onto the concrete. It wasn't personal, man. Darius's jaw tightened. It was to me. He grabbed Snake by the throat, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. Snake struggled, clawing at Darius's arm, but there was no escape. Please, Snake choked. I can get you money. I can. Darius didn't care. He tightened his grip. Snake's struggles grew weaker. His eyes rolled back. And then, Darius let go. Snake collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Darius crouched beside him. I want you to remember this moment, he said, his voice low. I want you to remember the fear, the helplessness. This is what you did to my dog. Snake whimpered. Darius stood, and then, with precise, unrelenting force, he ended it. The aftermath. The city was silent. The Black Vultures were finished. The Bratva had been sent a brutal message. Darius stood on a rooftop staring at the skyline. His war was over, but his heart was still heavy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog collar. The metal was scratched and worn, but it was all he had left of shadow. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the grief. Then as the sun began to rise, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Somewhere out there, another war would come, and when it did, the deadliest assassin alive would be ready. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you haven't subscribed till now, please do. Click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share to friends for more.